Alright, welcome to the next video in our subunit on the problem of personal identity. And in this lecture, we're going to look at dualist solutions or dualist accounts of personal identity. Basically, dualist answers to what is a person and what does it take for a person to be identical, with, I guess, like say a person at 2010, what does it take for them to be identical with themselves in 2011 or whatever? So the dualist answer to diachronic identity. So recall the dualist thesis concerning personal identity is that I am identical to my soul. So the soul, according to the dualist, and just is the person. So that's the dualist answer to personal identity. A person just is their soul, and vice versa. We could formalize it. X is a person if and only if X is a soul, for example. So then, you as an adult are identical to you, the baby, in spite of the fact that your body now is very different from your baby body. Because the baby's soul is numerically identical to your body's soul now. So what makes this baby be Ron Howard? The same person is the same soul. So even though the bodies change, and they do, all of our bodies change, our souls kind of persist through that change. And this can be generalized to all judgments about personal identity. For any X and any Y, X is the same person as Y if and only if X's soul is identical to Y's soul. So then judgments about sameness of person are really judgments about sameness of soul, according to the dualist. Well, there's a problem with this position. How are you to know that the same soul occupies the body of your roommate today that occupied your roommate's body yesterday? So I imagine, most of you being college students, that you have roommates. And you want the same person that walked into your apartment last night that has keys to your place. You want that person this morning that you saw in the kitchen to be the same person that you signed a lease with. You don't want to sign a lease with a person and then find out that a whole nother person's been living there all along after that. So the question is, how would you know? Well, the dualist has a response. These are some fancy words. They say we're going to need to distinguish between metaphysics and epistemology. We need to distinguish metaphysics from epistemology. And the dualist thesis about personal identity is a metaphysical thesis about the identity conditions of person. Mainly, persons are souls, so sameness of person happens when there is sameness of soul. The dualist can then state that your roommate today is the same person as the roommate yesterday only if the same soul occupies the body. Alright, well, I've just used these fancy words, metaphysics and epistemology. Let's go back a few slides. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Okay, episte, E-P-I-S-T-E, is the study of knowledge, and then ology is the study of. So epistemology is the subdiscipline in philosophy that studies knowledge, when we know something. Metaphysics is more the study of what exists, what is the nature of reality. For example, an epistemological question would be, how can we know that there is an external world? A metaphysical question would be, does God exist? Are we souls, or are we physical bodies? Do we have free will? So there are different sub-disciplines within the field of philosophy. Ooh, I have an email. All right, and I'm going to explain more of this as we go along, and I think these distinctions will become more evident too as I move along. So I'm just going to move on. Well, this distinction between metaphysics and epistemology is important, and it's relevant to the dualist position, because the dualist solution to the problem of personal identity is a metaphysical solution. It tells you what conditions must be satisfied if a person at some time, t1, is to be numerically identical to a person at a later time, t2. So, for example, the dualist tells you what conditions must be satisfied if Opie is to be numerically identical to Ron Howard. But the dualist solution is not an epistemological solution. It doesn't tell you how you might go about finding out whether or not Opie is numerically identical to Ron Howard. Here's an analogy. Chemists oftentimes tell us that water is H2O. That is, H2O is the essence of water. It's the chemical composition of it. So that's kind of the scientific, the chemist's definition of water. Not the show with the mermaids. More like the molecule. So, now suppose you're in the woods and you're really thirsty and you saw a large body of liquid in the near distance. Well, to find out if that body of liquid was water, you wouldn't do a chemical analysis on it the way chemists do to find out if it's actually composed of H2O molecules. No. You'd look for other features of it, such as it being clear, having fish in it, not burning your skin when you touch it, and so on. It rippling when you throw rocks at it, okay? And the fact that there are fish swimming in it would be evidence that it's water, because we know that fish swim in water. Fish don't swim in acid, or gasoline, or milk, alright? So how you would find out as a hiker in the woods if this body of water, if this body of liquid is water, is not the same thing as, you know, the scientific explanation of what water is, in other words. So the scientific explanation of what water is that it's H2O. How you find out if that body of liquid over there is water, though, isn't, you know, through a scientific process like using an electron microscope. You look for certain features. Alright, so in other words then, the way you go about finding out if something is X, for example, that liquid over there is water, or Opius, identical to Ron, isn't the same thing as giving strict criteria for whether or not something is an X. How the settlers went about finding water in the wild, wild west is not the same thing the chemist does when examining the chemical constitution of water. Finding out if Opie is Ron also is not the same thing as doing the hard philosophical work of discovering the criteria for some X's being a person, and the criteria for some X's, for some person at a time, T being identical to a person at a later time, T hyphen, okay? Two different things going on here. One's a metaphysical explanation, which is a lot like the scientific explanation of water, and the other is this epistemological explanation, how to go about finding out if something is something or other. And I'm going to spend some time on this point. I'm sure quite a few of you are still lost right now on what the heck I mean by metaphysics and epistemology, and the difference between a metaphysical versus an epistemological explanation. So let's spend some more time on this. This is an important distinction that is relevant not just to the problem of personal identity, but it's relevant to a lot of things. All right, so the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle famously said that the order of knowing is not the same as the order of being. What does he mean by that? Well, here's another analogy. Fire causes smoke, all right? So smoke is caused by fire. You light a cigarette, the cigarette's on fire, and then there's smoke coming from it. You throw a match in some gasoline, and you get smoke. You burn some wood, the wood's on fire, and then you get smoke, right? Well, we'll say then that fire is metaphysically prior to smoke in the order of being. There would be no smoke if there were no fire. So again, fire is metaphysically prior to smoke. You wouldn't have smoke without fire. But we often see smoke first. For example, you're in the woods and you see smoke up in the sky, and then you infer fire from it. So smoke can be prior to fire in the order of knowing. You first know the smoke, and then you later know that there is a fire. So then you come to know that there is a fire because you first knew that there was smoke. So in this case, we would say that the smoke is epistemologically prior to the fire. All right? Well, what the dualist is doing with respect to defining a person and giving criteria for personal identity is offering a metaphysical explanation. They're saying, okay? Similarly, when a chemist defines water as H2O, the chemist is offering a scientific explanation of water's essence. So, water is H2O. Hydrogen and oxygen are prior to water in the order of being, even though in the order of knowing, it took thousands of years for us to discover that water is made out of H2O. So we first knew that water was this liquid stuff that's clear, that freezes when cold, that evaporates when hot, that you can drink, that fish swim in. We knew all this stuff first, and then later we knew that water was made out of H2O. So, in the order of knowing then, we didn't first know that it was H2O, and then discover all these other features of water, like it's clear. However, in the order of being, water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. all these properties of water, that it's liquid, that it's clear, that it freezes or evaporates depending on the temperature that the fish swim in it, is explained by the fact that water is made out of H2O. Okay? So in the order of being, H2O is prior to all these other properties of water. So there's an asymmetry there. All right? So, for example, then what the settlers wanted when they were looking for water out in the Wild Wild West, and what you want in finding out if Opie is Ron, is an epistemological matter. You want to go about finding out how you would know if Ron is Opie, how you would find that out. And as mentioned before, epistemology is the study of knowledge. And it's a branch of philosophy that we're actually going to spend a whole unit on soon. And when what you seek is an explanation of how to find out if X is a person, or if that stuff over there is water. So even if the dualist can't help you find out if Opie is Ron, that doesn't mean that the dualist is wrong, however, about the metaphysical criteria of personal identity, which we say is that sameness of person is because of sameness of soul. So if you have the same soul as yesterday, then you're the same person as yesterday. Okay, that's the metaphysical explanation. And here's one more point to kind of show this distinction. Then, a blind chemist who studies water and knows all sorts of details about the chemical composition of water would not be wrong about the chemical constitution of water, even if that chemist couldn't help you find out if that liquid stuff over there is water. Okay, so a blind chemist knows that water is H2O. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't suddenly follow that if that chemist who is blind can't help you figure out if this body of the liquid over there is water, it doesn't mean that he's suddenly wrong that water is H2O just because if he can't help you. So the chemist is right about the metaphysical explanation of water, even if the chemist can't help you find out if that stuff over there is water, because it's two different types of explanations that we're seeking. All right, I think I've spent enough time on this distinction. So the dualist then has a metaphysical explanation of what a person is, even if they don't have a handy criteria to help you find out if someone's a person. Well, this doesn't get them out of the water yet. Surely it would be nice if the dualist had some means for finding out if Opie is Ron. Because if the dualist cannot, then a rival theory that can offer helpful means for finding out if Opie is Ron would be preferred. What do I mean by this? Well, take two theories, T1 and T2, that both purport to offer a metaphysical explanation of personal identity. Alright? So, T1 offers a metaphysical explanation for why X is a person, but T1 does not offer any guidance to the epistemological issue of finding out, specifically, for example, if Opie is Ron. On the other hand, T2 also offers a metaphysical explanation for why X is a person, but it also offers epistemological guidance for finding out if Opie is Ron. So here's a handy chart. Theory 1 can offer a metaphysical explanation of what is necessary and sufficient for X being a person. But Theory 1 cannot offer a way to find out if a particular X is a person, or when two persons are identical. But Theory 2 also has a metaphysical explanation, and it can offer you a way to find out. So Theory 1 is lacking something that Theory 2 offers. Well, then we would probably prefer Theory 2 then. We'd say Theory 2 is a better theory of what a person is. So if there's a theory of a person that can say yes to both questions, then that would be more likely to be true, we would say, than Theory 1. Because Theory 2 can just do more. It does more for us, all right? So, of course, then Theory 2 would be preferred. So, the dualist theory of personal identity, if it's going to still succeed, it should offer some guidance as to how you might find out if Ron is numerically identical to Opie. Well, the dualist might answer, though. Sameness of body is a reliable guide to sameness of person. So if the body is the same, then the person is the same. If that body equals that body, then that guy is that guy. But there's a problem. Immaterial souls are not observable. You can't see them. They're not extended. They don't take up space. They don't weigh anything. Light doesn't reflect off them because they're non-physical. So there seems to be no way to determine if the sameness of body is in fact a reliable guide to sameness of soul. But there is evidence that the sameness of body indicates sameness of soul in, well, my case. I know my soul and my body are consistently found together. Okay? So the dualist has a response. And then from this particular case, I know that my soul and my body are always together. Therefore, I can infer that if I see your body day after day, I can infer that you have the same soul, and then therefore that it's the same person. So you generalize from one case to all these other cases. It's not the best inference, but it's a start. But there's problems with that, though. Well, for one thing, for all you know, you've had multiple souls throughout the history of your body. In other words, how do you know that you've had sameness of soul? You know that your body has had the same person over time. But from there, how do you infer that the body's had the same soul? So maybe your body's had multiple souls. In that case, persons aren't aligned with souls. Instead, persons would be aligned with bodies on this picture, for example. So the dualist answer to personal identity has some problems, has issues. It's not a perfect theory yet, maybe. What we want, though, is a theory of personal identity that makes sense of our true judgments that Opie is Ron Howard, and also explains how we can find out if Opie is Ron Howard. Well, there's a different dualist approach. So the dualism is not irreparable yet. So let's take a look at this alternative approach. And this will be the dualist's continuity criterion. So recall the example of the ship of Theseus. It's not having the same parts that makes the second ship that Theseus was sailing on the same as the original ship. Instead, it's this continuity through space and time. So the dualist has a similar criterion that they can employ. What makes Ron in 2014 numerically identical to Opie in 1964 is that there is a relation of continuity between Ron and Opie. And by Opie, by the way, I mean the actor who plays Opie, Ron Howard. Well, by continuity, then we mean that there is no time between Opie and Ron in which the person does not exist. At each instant in this temporal path between Opie and Ron, there is an entity for which we have no reason to judge as not identical with the entity present a moment before. So in this case, we're not really concerned with what the entity is made out of. Instead, we're concerned with the relations that obtains from moment to moment by what we judge to be that entity. Okay? Well, is this clear? I imagine not. That's clear as mud, right? So let me illustrate, or let me explain more what I mean by this continuity through time, these continuity relations. And this should make a lot more sense of what we're saying then. So the philosopher John Locke famously argued that sameness of person is established by sameness of consciousness, rather than the stuff a person is made out of. So then Locke says that there's a difference between sameness of person and sameness of human. All right. Take, for example, a prince who swaps bodies with a hipster barista. So suppose hipster barista wakes up in Prince William's body, and Prince William one day wakes up in the hipster barista's body. So it's possible that you can like swap bodies with someone. But there's a continuous, what would make us say that Prince William is now in the hipster barista's body, though, is this continuity in the consciousness. It's like his consciousness moved from one body to another, and there's a continuous path from one to the other that we can identify. And according to John Locke, the barista would now be the same person as the prince, even though it's a different human. So Locke decouples persons from humans. He detaches the concepts. Different humans can be the same person, and different persons can occupy the same human body, according to Locke. So there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between humans and persons. Well, how should this continuity of consciousness be understood? Locke had a famous answer that we should explore, and it's the memory criterion. According to the philosopher John Locke, it consists in the ability to extend backward our consciousness in time to past actions and thoughts. So in other words, this continuity of consciousness consists in links of memory. And Locke writes, for as far as any intelligent being can repeat the idea of any past action with the same consciousness it has of any present action, so far it is the same personal self. Well, what do we mean by this? Take a person P1 at a time T1. And we'll say that P1 is identical, numerically identical to a person P2 at a time T2, if and only if P2's memories include P1's memories. That is, P1 is numerically identical to P2 only if everything that P1 remembers, P2 remembers. So P2 has all of P1's memories. All right. So think about this. In 2014, well, think of this. You remembered stuff in 2013. Now it's 2014. You have new memories that you made this year, but you also still possess all the memories you made last year. So you in 2014 include all the memories that you had in 2013. Therefore, then we'll say that you in 2014 are identical to you in 2013. This is just a common sense view of, how memory works and how we can kind of trace persons through time. Our memories grow as we move through time. We're constantly experiencing new things, and therefore we're constantly making new memories. So a person at a time in the future is identical to a person now if that person in the future has all the memories that the person now has, plus some. All right? So that's how we can say that a future person is numerically identical to a present person, or a present person is numerically identical to a person from the past. Basically, a person at a later time is numerically identical to a person at an earlier time. And what we'll say is that a person at a later time is numerically identical to a person at an earlier time when the person at the later time's memories include all the memories that the person at the earlier time has. Okay? I don't think I need to explain this anymore. Well, how does this criterion fare? Initially, I'd say it does pretty well. For one thing, I can only remember my past experiences and thoughts and so on. I don't remember your past experiences because they're your experiences. So it seems that memory does, in fact, appropriately hook up with me versus you, okay? My memories now hook me up with me in back then, not you back then. I have my memories, you have your memories. I don't remember your memories, you don't remember my memories. So this seems like a plausible, common sense criterion for personal identity then. But there's a problem. Actually, there's several problems with this view. There are several mentioned in the book that I was assigned. And then there's another problem that's not mentioned in the book. I'm going to walk through the problem that the book doesn't mention, and then you should read about the problems that the book mentions, okay? So I'm going to walk through a problem that the book doesn't mention, but I think it's a pretty devastating problem for this account of personal identity. Well, there's a problem. First, numerical identity is what logicians call a transitive relation. So if x is identical to y and y is identical to z, then x is identical to z. Well, let's talk about transitive relations for a minute. If a relation R is transitive, then if x bears R to y and y bears R to z, then x bears R to z. That's just a feature of all transitive relations. Here's some examples. For example, the dog is larger than the cat. All right? So the dog is one thing, the cat is another thing, and then they're related to by this certain relation, is larger than. The dog is related to the cat via the relation is larger than. Well, the cat is larger than the baby. So the cat is related to the baby via the relation is larger than as well. Well, then we can infer that the dog is larger than the baby, because is larger than is a transitive relation. All right? Now, not all relations are transitive. So that is, there are some relations. There is at least one relation R such that if x bears R to y and y bears R to z, it does not follow that x bears R to z. For example, Susie likes Doug. So Susie is related to Doug via the relation likes. Doug likes cats. So Doug is related to cats via the relation likes as well. But likes is not a transitive relation. All right? So it does not follow that Susie likes cats just because Susie likes Doug and Doug likes cats. All right, well, identity is a transitive relation. So take again Ron Howard at 3 different stages in his life, as a kid, a teenager, and an adult. Suppose that Ron Howard, the teenager, remembers all of kid Ron Howard's experiences. So teen Ron remembers going fishing with Andy Griffith, for example. Well, in that case, by the memory criterion, teen Ron is numerically identical to kid Ron because teen Ron's memories include all of kid Ron's memories. Suppose also that adult Ron has memories of all of teen Ron's experiences. Well, in this case again, adult Ron is numerically identical to teen Ron. However, given the transitivity of identity, adult Ron is then numerically identical to kid Ron. But suppose that due to a head trauma, adult Ron has no memories of any of kid Ron's experiences. And that's a very plausible scenario. Okay? Well, by Locke's memory criterion then, adult Ron is not numerically identical to kid Ron, because adult Ron memories do not include any of kid Ron's memories or experiences. But that's a contradiction. Recall, by the transitivity of identity, adult Ron is kid Ron. But by Locke's memory criterion, adult Ron is not identical to kid Ron. That's a serious flaw. All right? Contradictions are pretty serious flaws. So Locke's memory criterion of personal identity, as expressed, can lead to contradictions. And as I mentioned, that's a serious flaw for his theory. So in the next lecture, then, we'll look at materialist accounts of personal identity, and we're going to see if they fare any better.